Sometimes a client comes to us, but we're not sure if we want the job. Maybe there's a red flag, or maybe we just don't have time. But for a lot of us, we could really use the money, or maybe we're trying to build up our portfolios and careers. When a client comes knocking on our door, how do we know if we should say yes or no? How can we be certain that we're making a good decision? In this video, I'm going to give you 5 questions you can ask yourself to know with more certainty whether you should take on that iffy job. I'm all about saying no to the wrong jobs so I can say yes more to the right ones. That being said, we can't spend all our time waiting for the perfect job to arrive, so stick around to the end and I'll be giving some tips on how to transform almost any job into the right one. Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, my name's Tom Froese. I'm an illustrator and top teacher on Skillshare where I've helped over 100,000 students unlock the world of commercial illustration. Today's episode is brought to you by Astropad Studio. Astropad is an app that turns your iPad into a screen-based graphics tablet for your Mac. Students often ask me how I use my iPad and my Apple Pencil while working in Photoshop on my Mac. The answer is Astropad Studio. For years, I tried working with a traditional graphics tablet, but not seeing what I was drawing on the tablet itself was super awkward, and I could never get used to working on it. So I would make most of my brush strokes with physical media and scan it into Photoshop. Honestly, getting Astropad was a huge game changer for me. It has, without a shadow of a doubt, helped me become a better illustrator by giving me more control in the strokes and paths that I'm laying down directly on the computer. Astropad has enabled me to have an all-digital workflow, which, even though I'm a slow illustrator, has made me way faster. Today, Astropad is used by professional artists and designers around the world. If you're ready to take your creative workflow to the next level, you can start your free 30-day trial of Astropad Studio today. Visit astropad.com to get started. Thank you so much, Astropad. Love your product. Thank you so much for your support. Okay, let's get into the content. As we go through these 5 questions to ask when screening your clients, if you find any of this helpful, it would mean so much for me if you could please hit that like button. That's the best way to bump it up in the algorithm and help others like you discover my content. So a potential client reaches out to you in an email about a possible job. Maybe there's something about the request that seems off to you, but you need the money. Or maybe the client seems awesome, but you're kind of busy and don't necessarily want to add to your workload right now. So maybe you kind of want to say no, but you're worried you're leaving money on the table or would be throwing away a good opportunity. There are some situations when whether you say yes or no to a job is kind of a no-brainer. Like for instance, maybe it's a client you've always wanted to work with or a dream project. In these cases, you don't need to ask any more questions. And that's not what this video is about. This video is about knowing what to do when the opportunity or potential for the job seems less clear. In these situations, it really comes down to the conflict between doing what you want and doing what you should, or at least what you think you should be doing. You know that if you did what you wanted all the time, you'd probably never get work. But if you keep taking on work you don't like because you feel guilty about turning it down, that will only make it more likely you'll keep getting work you don't like, and ultimately that leads to burnout, and we don't want that. So I have 5 simple questions you can ask yourself when you're in this situation. As an established illustrator, I have the privilege of picking and choosing my jobs, and that means I have to go through these questions myself all the time. So here's how this works. Given a job that comes into you and you feel kind of iffy about it, and you ask these questions, if you can say yes to most of them, you should be able to confidently say yes to this job. If you say no to most of these questions, on the other hand, you should probably say no. So let's go through each one now and kind of go deeper. So the first question you should ask is the assignment interesting to you? This is the most important question to ask. Money aside, as artists, we want to work on projects that inspire us and align with our values. What makes an opportunity interesting? Maybe the subject matter is up your alley. For instance, I'm a runner, so if an art director of a running magazine reaches out to me, even if the pay might not be so good, I might still enjoy the opportunity. Maybe the subject doesn't necessarily interest you, but the format does. Maybe it's a large outdoor mural or a kid's book or an opportunity to participate in a gallery show, and you've been dreaming of doing something like this. What interests you about a project could be anything. So you want to ask, is the assignment interesting to you or not? So the next question to ask is, do you want to work with this client? Sometimes a project may not really excite you on its own. It could just be another editorial illustration or another series of character-based illustrations for a tech client. Or maybe it's an illustration about some boring facts and figures for a corporate report. But maybe it's for a client you want to work with. Why might you want to work with a client? Perhaps they're just big and impressive, and you think they'd look good on your CV. That's a perfectly good reason to want to take on a job. Or perhaps you think that maybe this will give you an in with the company, and who knows, maybe they'll give you something more interesting later on. While it's not certain, it is a possibility and possibly worth considering. Sometimes a client doesn't seem all that impressive, but they align with your values in some way. Or maybe the client really just seems to like your work. They may not have a big budget or even have a super cool project for you, but they're a fan. Working with fans can be a lot of fun, and it's always nice to work with someone that you know appreciates what you do. When might you not want to work with a certain client? The first test is the gut test. Does something feel off to you about them? If you don't feel comfortable with a client at the deepest level, even if you can't exactly say why, you might be onto something. I'm not saying your gut is always right, but it's important to listen to it and probe further. You know, what seems to be the problem? Look deeper into it. Another test is, of course, looking for red flags. A red flag is some kind of sign that the client will be trouble. This could be its own episode, but some big red flags would be like if a client reaches out to you in a really unprofessional way, like maybe just super casually in a direct message on Instagram or something like that. I get those sometimes and they just go right into the trash. Sometimes clients are asking for a quote without telling you a lot about the project. They're being vague, and I think that's a red flag. It just shows that they're not approaching this very seriously. Sometimes they have just a really unrealistic timeline, and so if you think they're asking for something that's going to really stress you out or that's actually impossible, you might just let that one go. Another red flag would be if a client doesn't seem to know what they want. And depending on the client, it may or may not be worth the effort to try and squeeze out what they really want out of it. I mean, I'm a big supporter of asking questions and making the best of every opportunity. And, clients don't always know what they want, and it's our job to get them there. But also, if they don't seem like they know what they want and they don't really seem like you're already kind of on the fence, then maybe you can let this one go. And another red flag is like they seem to be contacting you not as you, the illustrator, but as some general illustrator. Like maybe they found you on a Google search and you came up on top and they're just asking you to do something. And just by the way they're framing their request, you can tell that they're not asking you to do what you do. This is an opportunity just to, say like, this is what I do. Is this what you're looking for? But if they don't really seem to be coming to you for who you are and what you do, that to me is a red flag, and you can let that client, that opportunity slide off. Okay, so another one, this is a big red flag, and I'm getting a lot more of these days. I don't know about you guys, but these emails, invitations to platforms, they're looking for, creatives, for influencers or whatever, and they're looking for people to be the first on their platform, and it's a rare opportunity, or you're going to get exposure. All of these kind of read as scammy to me, the big red flags. And, they're really asking you to put yourself on the line for them without really any guarantee that you're going to get anything back. And I really believe that we need to measure our opportunities like this very carefully and just really ask ourselves, like, I'm going to put all this effort in for this company. What are they giving back? And of course, the most obvious thing we can get back for our work is money, getting paid. So don't really fall for those scammy requests if possible. Big red flag. Really, you should get a good sense of what a client is like just by your first impression of them. Choose your clients in the way that you would choose friends. Work with people you like and don't work with people you don't like. Okay, so the next question you should ask when screening clients is, do you have time to take it on? Do you have time to take this project on? The client might actually seem great and the project interests you, but maybe you're actually really busy right now. What you're busy with actually doesn't matter. It could be work stuff or life stuff. But whatever it is you're doing, if you're struggling now, adding a new project into the mix is not going to help you do those things any better. Consider what your priorities are and do whatever you can to protect them. Sometimes you have to say no to good opportunities because they'll hurt your performance on the things you've already got on your plate. It's always more important to do a good job with your current obligations than to take on one more thing and do badly at all of them, to do badly at everything. I know it actually can really hurt when you say no to opportunities for this reason. You know, I've had to turn down juicy projects many times because I know it would just create a lot of stress in my life. I also know that no matter how juicy the opportunity might seem, it's not going to look very good in the end if I didn't have time to give it my best. Of course, there are times I think when we feel busier than we are, and if really pressed, we would find that we do in fact have time for one more project. For me, when a good project comes, but I feel like I might be too busy for it, I'll spend some time really looking at my calendar and seeing how I might squeeze it in. Also, if I really want a job but I don't have the time, I ask the client if they have some wiggle room, if they have room in their schedule to push the dates back a little. You know, more often than not, they actually do. So it's always a good idea to check. Okay, so the next question to ask when screening your clients is the budget enticing? I said earlier that money aside, it matters more that you're personally interested in the project. That being said, money is also super important, and I would be lying if I said it didn't factor into my decision about whether to take on a project or not. I've turned down many interesting jobs and impressive clients because the budgets were too low. How do you know if a budget is enticing? It might be a lower budget, but a project I know I can turn around fairly quickly, in which case I might just take it on, but only because I was able to say yes to most of the other questions that we're asking here. Of course, the budget may be on the higher side, in which case the other factors here, whether I'm interested or have time, for instance, they matter less. I mean, if the budget's really good, that's a pretty good enticement and sometimes a great reason to take on a project. There's always time and interest when the budget is high enough. For many projects, it's less about whether the budget is enticing and more about if it's fair. If you have to put food on the table, you should at least prioritize jobs that offer reasonable fees. While pricing is a whole other can of worms, a quick way to gauge if a budget is fair is to break it down into an hourly rate. Estimate as best as you can how long you think the job would take you in hours, and then divide the client's budget by those hours. And then ask yourself, would you work any job for that rate? Well, I definitely recommend you do not charge by the hour or even talk about hourly rates with your clients. It's something you need to keep in mind when considering the value of a project. Just like timing, budgets can be negotiated up. So if you find that the project would end up earning you something like $10 an hour, consider asking for a fee that would put you more up in the $15 to $20 range, or much higher depending on how much of a go-getter you are. Sometimes the budget is low, but I still want to take on the project for other reasons, in which case I try to remove certain features or expectations to help justify working for a lower fee. You don't have to offer champagne for beer prices, but maybe your client would love a beer if you could make one. So maybe offer fewer rounds of revisions or fewer sketches, or ask for a later deadline, or scale back what you're offering in some way. You're making a compromise, and I think the client should be willing to make a compromise as well. Lastly, and this is kind of the elephant in the room here, you know, often the client doesn't give you a budget. They want you to quote on the job. And again, while pricing is a huge can of worms, the situation does put you at an advantage. The question of, is the budget enticing or is the budget fair, now becomes, what would an enticing or fair budget be? In other words, how much do you want based on what you think is fair? Name your price. Again, a very rough way to work this out if you're just beginning is to consider what you want to earn per hour and times that by how long you think the job will take. It's not very sophisticated, and I don't recommend this as a long-term strategy, but it's better than nothing. And remember, just never to talk about hourly rates with your client. This is something you do in your mind, privately, just to work out the value of a project. Illustration work should always be charged a flat rate. You agree on the cost up front, and then that's what the client pays. So the last question to ask yourself when screening clients is, regardless of budget, will the project create any new opportunities? Very often a project might have all kinds of compromises about it, but it promises to open doors to things you want. For instance, maybe the job is for a client you've always wanted to work for, or it's in a format or context you've always wanted to try. We've already talked about these things in some of the other questions. What other opportunities might come from taking an otherwise passable project? A few years ago, I had an opportunity to become the regular illustrator for a weekly column. The pay was good and the client was cool, so it did have those things going for it. But for me, weekly deadlines was a more aggressive timeline than I was used to, and I also don't like feeling like I'm chained to a job for the long term or indefinitely, especially because I feel like maybe in the future I might not be interested anymore and I want to kind of try other things. For me, being a regular contributor comes with the risk that I might get bored of the job eventually, which for me is kind of, well, it's a very likely thing. At the same time, I also saw this as an opportunity to grow as an illustrator, especially in terms of working faster and developing my style. I'd be trying to do these things anyway, so why not just do it for a client and get paid along the way? Sometimes we have to look just beyond the negatives we see in front of us, and if we look hard enough, we can see the bigger picture. When all signs are pointing to saying no to a job, use this last question as the opportunity to challenge yourself, to ask yourself, no, like really, why shouldn't I take on this job? If in the end you find there's truly nothing to be gained by taking on a certain project, then I don't think you could have a clearer reason than that to say no. So those are the 5 questions you should ask when screening clients who come knocking on your door. If you can answer yes to most of them, then you should probably just take on the job. If you answer no to most of them, on the other hand, then it's probably wise just to let this one go. But maybe you're still somewhere in the middle and aren't quite sure. You have to ask yourself, what's more important to you in this moment? Is it paying your next visa payment, or feeling like you have ultimate freedom in what you do and who you work for? Both of these things are important, but sometimes one is more important than the other in the given moment. Now, well, I hope that all of you can get to a place where you're only taking on work that you love. Realistically, we have to pay our bills and make compromises all the time. Also, there's really no such thing as the perfect job anyway. The late writer and advertising executive Paul Arden said, "Don't look for the next opportunity. The one you have in hand is the opportunity." He continues, "We are always waiting for the perfect brief from the perfect client, but it almost never happens." I think this has been true in my own career for sure. Most of the jobs I've had have been kind of mediocre. There's nothing kind of that great about any of them, or, they didn't have to be anything great about them. They weren't all as promising as they turned out to be. There's usually some kind of reason to believe that such and such a job is just not good enough for me. Maybe the subject is boring, or maybe I didn't like the potential client's website when I went to go learn more about them. Maybe I feel like they're out of my league or not in my wheelhouse. However you want to put it, there's a lot of hubris that can cause me to screw up a perfectly good opportunity. Okay, so yes, we should be increasingly more selective of the work we take on as we progress in our careers. Yes, that is a good thing. But also, we should be honest with ourselves about what we really could be doing in the moment. If we believe in our own talent and ability, if we want to keep growing and stay on our feet, we should always be putting our skills to the test. We should always be using them and keeping them active. And for a lot of us, we're going to go through times when it feels like there really are no good opportunities that are coming our way. And a lot of us are honestly going to feel like we don't have the luxury of being selective. In these cases, we have to change our view of things. In episode 87 of this channel, I talked about how you can get your dream job, but the catch was that sometimes you have to change your dreams. If you haven't watched this episode, I highly recommend it. I'll leave a link in the description and in the end cards. But to summarize it all, My point was that the people who truly make it in our industry, or in any field really, are those who don't hold themselves to a narrow definition of success. Instead, around every corner is an opportunity to develop our art, our craft, our careers, or ourselves in some way. When we see each opportunity in this light, it's almost impossible to fail. We may find ourselves struggling, but we'll also find ourselves much further ahead than if we sat there and did nothing while waiting for something better to come along. So in episode 87, just real quick, I recap a story from a Disney movie. There's this guy who wants to be recognized as a graphic novelist, and he's not getting a lot of success in that field, and so he ends up working basically at Walmart, just a crappy retail job. There's nothing in the story about other ways he's using his skills to make inroads into a fulfilling career in the arts. In other words, he's working at this Walmart job and not using any of his skills because they're not fitting his definition of success. For him, it's all or nothing. If he would look outside his narrow view of success, he could probably be using his creativity to get paid now. Instead, he waits for the perfect publisher to discover him. You know, I suppose it wouldn't be a Disney movie if it wasn't a Cinderella story. Okay, but for us as illustrators, a big fear is that we'll take on a job and then feel like we don't really get to make what we want. Maybe the client expects us to illustrate in someone else's style. Maybe the project itself is super boring. Maybe the client really wants us to make really boring, predictable illustrations rather than something new and exciting. You know, very often this is really just because our clients don't want something new. They want something that they've seen before, maybe like 1% different or something like that. Or maybe our clients just don't trust us. In either case, our job is to totally understand what the client wants and needs, and then to prove this understanding in our work. A client isn't going to really know how to direct us to do that though. You know, they can only lay down what they want and maybe give us a few rules. Again, as Paul Arden says, good briefs don't just come along. Successful solutions are often made by people rebelling against bad briefs. I love that. Successful solutions are often made by people rebelling against bad briefs. My other favorite Paul Rand, wrote something similar. As the material given to the designer is often inadequate, vague, uninteresting, or otherwise unsuitable for visual interpretation, the designer's task is to restate the problem. In other words, when a client gives us a bad brief, it's our job to turn it into a good brief. That means we need to make the call of what in the brief is important enough to hold on to and what is irrelevant, and then to springboard our ideas and our work from there. So what are some practical tips to transforming a bad brief into a good one? First, listen to what the client says they want or need. When a client feels you understand them, they'll trust you more to do what you do. Second, ask them how they think you specifically can help them achieve their goals. I always like to have new clients show me work of mine that inspired them to come to me in the first place. This will help you know better how to apply your greatest strengths to the job at hand. Third, ask the client for as much specific information as possible. Don't try to read their mind and don't accept vague direction. Lead the client to say exactly what they're looking for and be willing to help them get there through a patient conversation. Fourth, with all that you now know, make sure what the client is asking for and what you know you can provide with them match up. Just knowing you have the right skills to help your client can make you feel more purposeful and positive about the job. Lastly, once you're on the job, pour yourself into it. Own it. Make it yours. Forget about what you're being paid and make it your obsession to solve the creative problem. And do your best to the best of your abilities, whatever that might mean for you. All of these points are very important, but the last one is key. We can do amazing things when we pour ourselves into our work. We can't really do this well unless we truly feel it's ours to obsess over. That's why I say you gotta own the job, you gotta own the work. If the subject or project seems in any way uninteresting, relentlessly search for what is interesting about it. There's always something that you didn't expect or think about before, but you often have to dig for it. But when you do find it, you found something of great value. You found yourself. The moment you find something that captures your attention and imagination, you've found the one thing you need to be creative. You've found your own personal connection to the work, and it's only when it's personal that we can truly make work that matters. All right, I guess this turned out to be a double whammy with the 5 screening questions at first, and then 5 more bonus tips about how to transform bad briefs into good ones. If you want to go deeper into that, be sure to check out the video, which should appear as an end card any moment now. Hopefully you found all of this content helpful. Please let me know by pushing that like button, and of course, subscribe to support the channel and help it grow. YouTube success doesn't happen without you guys, my viewers, so I really appreciate it. Working with clients as illustrators is a huge part of what this channel is about. I'm actually just about to go into recording my next class, which walks you through the 6 stages of illustrating for clients. I've been working on this for so long, and so I'm so excited to finally get into the recording stage. Please stay tuned for the launch, which I hope will be near the end of March 2022. You know, if you're watching in the future, please go check that out at tomfroze.com/teaching, and that's where all my Skillshare classes will be. Meanwhile, if you want to be a part of my growing community of illustration learners, I invite you to find me over on patreon.com/tomfroze to learn more about how to get involved. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I'll see you in the next one.